Hello, and welcome to Vegas October 1 Sounds. This evening, I'll be doing a video on my good friend Hunter UK, who has sadly passed away. And I'm putting this video out to reassure people that while Hunter is gone, much of his work will not be lost. And basically, Hunter and I have been working together for quite a while, and I'm going to cover briefly what we've been working on and my efforts to move forward with the work that we started. So, every day that goes by I miss Hunter, and my last communication with him was on January 25th when he wrote to me from the hospital telling me he had survived a miracle operation and was expected to go home soon. I hadn't heard from him since, and after a few weeks, I got quite concerned, and then, some other people called me, and one thing led to another, and we found out that he had passed away. Hunter and I, to me, he was always a gentleman, a scholar, and a friend. And between us, in all the time that I've known him and talked with him, there wasn't a single day of drama or strife. He was tenacious, he was excruciatingly detailed, and a very rational thinker. And sure, we often speculated, to get our creative juices flowing. But when push came to shove, the work that he published was solid and demanding of respect. And I knew nothing else from Hunter but that. So, not too long ago, back in the middle of last year, the summer, Hunter sent me an email message asking to team up with him to do some work on the October 1 shooting. Now, prior to that, we'd had occasional back and forth, and he'd done several requests to me to provide him with some analysis of sound, both voice and gunshots, which I did. But prior to that, we really had not worked a great deal. And then starting last June, he got pretty serious in terms of what he wanted me to do. The first thing he asked me to get involved with was to do an analysis of the accidental discharge in room 135, and one thing led to another, and it was quite the experience. And after that, we'd exchanged several videos and emails and everything, and Hunter came back to me and said that he wished that he could do what I did with the sounds, to be very focused on one thing, and that he had this sense of incompleteness with his project on the Lock Interrogation Report. He felt like he never did a thorough enough or complete job to look at all the pieces of the Lock Interrogation Report and put forth a solid piece of work that covered everything that the Lock Interrogation Report had to offer in conjunction with the other evidence. So he asked me if he'd like to work with him on that, and I said yes. And that led to, probably nightly conversations, videos, emails, documents regarding not only the Lock Interrogation Report, but many, many other things. The project grew. We had originally talked about just doing the last 48 hours of Paddock's movements and whereabouts. But after we got into it heavily, and it took me a while to come up to speed because Hunter had been doing this stuff for 3 years and I was new to the Lock Interrogation Report, and so it took me a month and a half, 2 months to look at the Lock Interrogation Report, put it into a form that I could use, put it into a program and manipulate it and everything, and become expertise. But once that hurdle was passed, he and I were off to the races, and we did some fascinating work, some fascinating research, and with some, I think, fascinating results. And as we came to finish the last 48 hours, we had a big gap in our knowledge because there are a lot of things that the Lock Interrogation Report cannot tell you. And so we expanded out. We realized that we had to do more of the Lock Interrogation Report to get a baseline, and we had to, delve into the habits of Paddock and the other information that was available, both from the Mandalay video pictures and from the FIT report and from the witness statements and officer reports and all that sort of stuff. And so the project grew. And long about November, December, we concluded that this was going to be a much more substantial project than the last 48 hours. And that we would continue our investigations, mainly analysis form, into the early part of 2021. And then when the upcoming FBI release was dumped, we'd be in a good position to incorporate that into our work. And when that was complete, we could then start publishing videos. We hadn't decided even what form the videos would take. Maybe we'd do PDFs also. Maybe we'd do databases. Maybe we'd do animations. The world was our oyster, but we'd never really solidified how we were going to present everything to the community. Now, Hunter was the point man on everything. We'd already agreed that he'd be the primary mover in both the public interaction, the talking with the other people who became involved with the project in one form or the other, and he would take the lead in setting the tone for the whole thing. Now, and I was going to do, most of my work would be released either on his channel or my channel, but would be predominantly, of a technical nature, or perhaps graphical nature. And sadly, we never made it that far. And the minute I started suspecting that Hunter was no longer going to be with us, I started archiving everything. I archived our videos, our emails, our documents, and sadly there's some research that he had done that I was never privy to. For example, he was doing some timelines and spreadsheets on the first responders, which he felt, it wasn't appropriate to introduce that to me yet, because we were still making massive progress on interpreting the Lock Interrogation Report. So there's things which, he has done that I'm not privy to, that I'm unable to archive. All right. So anyway, yesterday I completed the archiving of all that data, and I archived, close to, this number is not correct here, not 350, but 250 videos between the two of us that we made over the last 6 months, 1,000 emails, and hundreds of documents. And all that information I will continue to use, and I will continue to move forward with our project. It's not going to be as grandiose. It's not going to be in Hunter style, sadly. But at least the community will get the benefit of the work that we had completed at the time of his death, and perhaps a little bit more, depending upon what I can muster. All right. I've already covered that. And I already covered that. So what do I plan to do? Well, when I heard of Hunter's passing, I started a new project. And basically that new project is trying to put together what type of information that I would like to present to the community, and then to lay it out in a form that I'll have ready access to it. And let me get to it over here. The form that I chose is basically a timeline outline, and I'm going to combine the FIT report, all the pieces of it, FIT report, Lock Interrogation Report, MGM videos, witness statements, and all those other things, and whatever comes forward from the FBI, into a timeline. And then from that timeline there'll be various pieces of information that will be integrated into it, and I'll have a complete picture. Now this is a massive project, and it has to be chunked into smaller pieces, and that's what this project is going to do. This is going to put the things into chunks so that I can see and people can understand um, what's there and what's available. For example, if we open up an outline here of where the project stands at the moment, and I've just started this a week ago, you'll see that for all of the days here, particularly those with the Lock Interrogation Report, I've chunked it up into manageable pieces, and I'll take each of those pieces and there'll be a video or 3 on that segment and relating and supporting information. So I hope, as you can see, there's quite a number of chunks, and in fact there's quite a number of areas of knowledge and research that he and I completed that I would like to share. It's just a matter of time and effort that I have to lay out. One day I sat down and I said, well, what can I present? And I came up with just a list, and the list just started growing so long that I had to stop. But these are all things that Hunter and I did in the last 6 months that I have to share with you. And when I'm done, I hope that I will leave the community with not only a series of videos, but also papers and databases that people can use that we've put together over the course of our efforts. So Hunter's work, while he won't be around to add his unique style, is not going to die with him. So let me just give you a flavor of what's to come, what is possible, and what you may see in the near future. Now, for those of you who want to know what the ultimate answers to everything are with regards to the October 1 shooting, I'll give you a quick high-grade mining of the information. Through our analysis of the Lock Interrogation Report and supporting and contradicting information, Hunter and I have reached a mutual conclusion that Paddock did not work alone. That is, prior to the actual shooting of the guns, Paddock had people in his room. He worked with them. They're sometimes there with him. They were sometimes there without him. And they were there late enough into the day, having left not more than, say, a half hour before the shooting actually began, that they had to be intimately aware of what was about to take place. And Paddock was not the lone wolf, is what we're going to argue. Now, my expertise in the acoustic analysis says that from that room there was only likely to be one shooter. So we're not proposing that anybody was in the room shooting with him, but we're saying that through the time duration of the Lock Interrogation Report, it appears that there was in fact more people in the room than just Paddock who were participating in the preparation for the shooting. As to the intent and motive and things like that, that's just so far beyond what we can come up in know that, barring further evidence, I can make no statement there. However, we can trace Paddock's movements fairly tightly throughout the days leading up to the shooting, and there are some pretty big reveals. And I'm not going to say what just yet, but in my course of working with Hunter, we came up with some very, very interesting observations that led us down a few paths that the FIT report didn't even allude to, and that became integral to understanding many of the activities both before the shooting and during the preparation for it. There's always room for doubt in this stuff. This isn't 10,000% correct with no holes otherwise, because the Lock Interrogation Report and the data supporting it surrounding and supporting it is ambiguous by its very nature. When the door opens and closes, did somebody come and go? Did somebody stay behind? Was there more than one person? Blah, 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 blah. There's always, an interpretation there. We also feel that Paddock did, in fact, jimmy the door in a couple of occasions. The reasons for that are fascinating. I'm not going, again, reveal that here, but it's not what you would expect necessarily, unless you've done the Lock Interrogation Report analysis, and I found it quite interesting. There's a lot of preparation work that has to go into coming to those conclusions and observations, and so it's going to take me a while to figure out what is the best way to lay this down in a form that people can understand. But I hope that when I have laid it down, that it will be revealing and continue to be useful in much the same way that Las Vegas Shooting Archive is essential to all research. And before I go too far along into this, I have to give much support to the people like LVSA and the others in the community who've devoted so much of their time, because without that devotion of time, Hunter and I would not have the information to work with. All right. So some of the things, we start out with, I started out with the Lock Interrogation Report, which is, nothing more than a bunch of things from events that occurred from the lock, which were reported to a server somewhere down the line, and took that, and I ended up at a place where I could produce things like this. This is a part of what I call a storyboard, and it's a graphical representation of both the Lock Interrogation Report, the FIT report, the MGM videos, and other information. So, for example, in this report or this pictorial view of events, I can quickly look at this and say, oh, he used the core elevator 1, 2, 3 times there, because it's in blue, and there's 2 other times where he had to use it because it is in blue. And then I can also look at this because of the color coding and notice that there was only one time here where he entered the valet park, but that the purple represents self-park or service elevators, and over here we get little pictures of him coming and going and all that sort of stuff. So on any one of these, for example, let's say over here where we see him coming in, I have the little images here in the times. There he is. He just came through the revolving doors at the casino level valet entrance, and here we see him, after having come through there, walk over and head over to the service core elevators, the central core elevators, and then eventually make his way up to his room, which you'll see then he had to, after having come through those doors, head up to the center core elevators, make entry to the room, and when he was up there he ordered food, and he peeked in and out of the doors. If he's waiting for something, he tested the cards, the food came, he ate, and he made some preparations for stuff. And then here at 15:24 he exited the room, took the core elevator down, and he was gone out of his room, but yet inside somebody threw the deadbolt. And so that incident alone leads to a conclusion, or at least a possible interpretation, that a second person was involved or inside the room at the time Paddock was out walking around. Paddock eventually made his way over to the Luxor Essential Shop and talked with a lady called Joanna. And then he came back a little bit later, which we don't know where yet. All we know for sure is that he was there at 4. And then, having done all that and did some other things, he took the core elevator back up to his room and did some various other things. He had to prep the guns, prep the food carts, put the L bracket on, and finally release hell upon the community. So this is just one example of things that I'll be presenting. In a similar fashion, somewhere along the lines, I had to Hunter and I Now I'm presenting mostly my work because Hunter had his work and I had my work, and I'll present some of his stuff as he gave it to me later. This is an example where I created another graphic to where I could look at all the luggage in the room at the time of the CSI folks. And for each piece of luggage, I could identify it, number it, and then I would attempt for that luggage to identify when it came in. So, for example, here are the two large suitcases over by the 134 adjoining doors, and I believe that they came in at this time, which would be, let's see, that was one of the bellhop trips. So, and then similarly, all of the bags have been accordingly allocated a date and a time. Another aspect of this is, or another way of looking at it, is to look at the trips up and down and lay out the bags that came in over it this way. So for, in this case, let's take the one of the last times that he came up with any bags from going through the front door. The bags involved there, as you can see, or at least I've identified this blue one, and there are a couple others we can identify that I haven't. This is a work in progress, shall we say. So that's the type and nature of the graphics that we can do, or have done. And I did the same thing for the contents of the bags. And in that sense, I have concluded, and Hunter agreed, that the guns actually came in early in the first few bellhop trips. That the ammo was the last thing to come in, and because of those conclusions, there are a lot of things that have to be taken note of in terms of what Paddock was doing. Because if he brought the guns in the first three bellhop trips, that's a whole lot different than trying to bring them in at the last point, because they had to be in the room for such a long time that anybody could have seen them. So why did he do that? Why did he bring in the guns first and the ammo later? That's a whole other story. So what other kinds of things will we be seeing? Well, there's many ways of looking at the information, and every time you look at it a different way, you gain more insight. For example, there was a time in which we really didn't understand Paddock's habits, so I laid out for every day that the Lock Interrogation Report a column and stuck what he was doing. Well, actually, it's more than just the Lock Interrogation Report. This is everything from the 18th through the 1st. I laid out what Paddock was doing in a columnar fashion, so all of the things in one day are in one column. And I kind of used the coloring code that I'd been using in the previous graphics. And then I observed that, wow, from 7 till 11, we can see right here that there was a big blocks of time in which there was no activity. And then Hunter pointed out to me that in his reading of other witness statements, everyone observed that Paddock was a nighttime critter and that he slept in the early morning hours. In fact, even Mary Lou Danley said that he gambled all night and then was up. And then he went to the bedroom. He was up all night gambling, then he would come into the room and sleep the early morning hours. And that was confirmed by looking at the activity that was absent. So this is his sleep hours, and that has a big impact on interpreting the times when Paddock is in the room and there's no activity between 6 a.m. and noon. Here we also had an observation that the time at which Paddock chose to come in with bags looks to coincide with the shift change. For example, with the bellhop stuff, there were 3 bellhop trips. 1 occurred during the afternoon, and 2 occurred after the shift change. And there's something similar that happens with the acquisition of access cards. And that's a whole nother and fascinating story when you have to account for all the access cards that Paddock has. And there's a very fascinating story that will come into that explains a huge chunk of one day of the Lock Interrogation Report. Things which you just look at the Lock Interrogation Report and it seems so bizarre as to be unfathomable, become readily apparent when you understand when he did things and why he did things. And that's something that Hunter initially spotted, and then I elaborated on, and together we came up with something that was very revealing, just very revealing. And yet there's still aspects of that story that we have yet to fathom, or that I will be forced to continue to investigate. All right, and then there'll be dozens of spreadsheets. Hunter was fond of spreadsheets. Spreadsheets and PowerPoint were his two main ways of presenting information. And boy, have I taken spreadsheets and used them effectively. But mostly I do it for doing a lower level analysis on the Lock Interrogation Report. I took the raw PDF file from the FIT report, which contained the Lock Interrogation Report, ran optical character recognition on it and converted it to a comma-separated list, and then shoved it into a Excel spreadsheet, looked at it, made some corrections. Then I took a programming language called Python, developed a program, read the spreadsheets, and produced these types of documents here, which again are spreadsheets that were produced, but they are produced by a program that looks at the raw data and manipulates it in ways that help me to understand it. Because there are a lot of things that have to be understood at the raw level that I didn't want to have to work through one by one on a line-by-line basis, so I wrote a program to assist me. And part of that is to develop a state machine to track the state of the locks, whether the door is open, closed, whether it's locked open, locked closed, whether the deadbolt's thrown, thereby deadbolting the door. Because if you have two rooms with deadbolts thrown and there's activity in the hallway, then you have a problem. Because that means that either the person in the hallway has no way of getting into the rooms, and typically that would imply that somebody was in the room. So there's a lot of things there. So that the Lock Interrogation Report, you have to track the state of those two, the open closed and the deadbolt thrown, and it becomes extremely important when you look at both rooms combined. Just with room 135 or 134, not so important, but because of those adjoining doors and the movements, otherwise you have to do that analysis. Well, let me just close out this video by playing a short clip from one of the hundreds of videos, by hundreds I should say, well over 125 videos that in the last 6 months Hunter sent me. And of course I sent him an equal amount. And so this is just a random video that I'm going to just play so that you can once again play at the beginning of it so they can hear Hunter's voice, because I truly miss waking up in the morning
Hi Rich, it's 14:22 on the 15th of November, my son's birthday, and I thought I needed really to get this video over to you. It's in two parts. First part is thank you so much for the video that you produce and your analysis on the guy with the Pelco system, and yeah, Mr. Dildo, man. I have my reasons for asking for your take on this, and I loved every single minute of it, and I mean every single minute. You made me laugh so much, and it's not often I laugh. I've got a sense of humor, but it takes a lot to make me actually physically laugh. Anyway, thanks for that. I'll do a follow-up video to get a further discussion on this, and but that's not the crux of this video. The crux of this video.
So anyway, every morning was a delight. I'd wake up to Hunter's voice, and similarly, with him, our hours being off, he could expect a video in return. So, Hunter's work will continue to live on, and I look forward to presenting it to the community. And hopefully people will can follow this series and we'll move forward with the project.